Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom, welcome to the program.
Good to be here. Thanks.
Well, you did not take a stand on California's Prop 19 4 years ago. It's a measure that would have legalized cannabis. Voters rejected it. Why are you supporting legalizing marijuana now?
Well, Prop 19, I was a coward. Frankly, I didn't give it a lot of thought. I tried to find excuses. There were prescriptive aspects of Prop 19 that I legitimately would not argue for today, that allowed too much autonomy at the county levels and could have created a real patchwork, a regulatory patchwork that was difficult. But I admired the courage of those that put that on the ballot to begin the conversation anew on the failure of the war on drugs. Had Prop 19 not been on the ballot, you would not have had a Colorado initiative and a Washington State initiative to move forward on this debate in an implementable way, in a substantive way. So I admire that. That said, about 2 years ago, someone asked me the question, and I couldn't equivocate any longer. I couldn't share my private thoughts any longer without the courage of sharing them publicly. And I said I support moving in a new direction, taxing, regulating for adults this drug in a thoughtful way that does our best to keep it out of the hands of our children.
But how would you do that? How would you go about regulating the manufacture, sale, and marketing of recreational marijuana?
Well, that's why we put together this task force with the ACLU to ask and answer those tough questions. I think the biggest challenge with Prop 19 is a lot of those questions remain silent. While there were prescriptive aspects of that initiative, there were other things that were left silent that left a lot of people wanting and it expressed a lot of concern about what this actually would mean. So we're trying to answer those tough questions now in anticipation of putting it on the 2016 ballot. Let me give you some examples of what that means. Is it for 21-year-olds? Or is it 18-year-olds? What are the advertising restrictions? What's the appropriate tax? If you tax too high, you still have a black market. What happens to existing medical marijuana clubs? Are you going to be in a competition? Is an appropriate tax for the medical marijuana clubs substantially lower than it is for the for-profit clubs? Do we allow anyone to have a license? Do we restrict those licenses? Who are the prioritized as it relates to those restrictions? What do we do about DUIs? All of these things, and I can go on honestly with a dozen other questions that we're asking and then now answering in this task force that I think we legitimately have to look people in the eye and be able to respond to before the initiative finds its way on the ballot in 16.
So obviously a lot of questions. There are polls showing now that a majority of Americans support legalizing marijuana, but yet still a lot of concerns. According to Columbia University's Center for Addiction and Substance Abuse, about 9% of adults who use marijuana do become addicted. Opponents say it could be the gateway to other more dangerous drugs. Kids could swipe their parents' cannabis supply. How do you respond to all that?
Yeah, I think all those are legitimate concerns. I get it. Look, I have 3 kids. I don't want to see them using and abusing the drugs. I don't like the drug. I don't like the smell. I don't want to see it at parks and playgrounds. I don't want to see people walking down the sidewalks smoking marijuana. Quite the contrary. I don't like drug abuse or drug use. That said, I don't like the war on drugs even more. It's a war on people of color, it's a war on poor people, and it's an outrage, and it's got to stop. We have to own up to the fact we spent 40 years drumming the beat of this war on drugs, aggressively expand our criminal justice system, and we've wasted $1 trillion, and yet the drugs are more plentiful, more powerful and potent than ever. So we have to own up to this, and I think this is where you start, and you have to have an honest and thoughtful conversation. You can't be flippant about this. I don't know of a parent that wants to see their children using and abusing drugs. There are real and legitimate concerns about brain development for very young people, young teenagers that are using this drug. It is a powerful drug. That said, incarcerating people, wasting money on the criminal justice system, continuing to perpetuate a mythology that we can do it in a way that does not discriminate, I think that needs to be questioned. We need to be judged to a much higher standard, a thoughtful standard. Time to regulate, time to tax, time to focus on doing our best to create harm reduction strategies around the drug use.
Having said that, though, you talked about the war on drugs, but do you run a risk here of creating a different kind of crime? For example, Colorado, where legal marijuana was legalized, this year. Law enforcement officials there are now noticing a new problem, which is they have documentation showing that marijuana from Colorado has now shown up in 40 other states, selling for up to 3 times the price.
Yeah.
Are we risking creating a new black market?
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, all these things need to be worked out. And I think, look, you have to be open to argument in this debate. You can't be ideological about it. And if you are ideological, you're not going to persuade a lot of people that may be on the fence on this. I think most people now, and your polls sort of bear that out, agree that something needs to change. And there's been a real push now, people saying, all right, maybe we should just decriminalize it. All of a sudden now there's a different debate even happening there because some people have had the courage to talk about legalizing it. Even folks on the right, Rick Perry, Grover Norquist, and other interesting folks that have been out front on this. George Shultz for years and years. William F. Buckley in his day was talking about this. Milton Friedman in his day was talking about moving in a different direction. Most people would acknowledge the idea that the federal government has in their Controlled Substances Act a schedule-run drug, marijuana, sitting side by side with heroin and LSD, and above in terms of its potency and problems, above methamphetamine and cocaine, that's absurd. And it's time we become more mature on this topic, have courage of our convictions, try to bring people that are concerned, parents, bring people that are concerned in the criminal justice system on to a conversation or on board a conversation where we can work through those black market concerns, work through the legitimate cultivation concerns, the issues of edibles, which are real concerns that I have, particularly as a parent, and how we actually do this in a very thoughtful and judicious way.
And real quickly, when will the task force finish its report?
We've been together for about a year, and we've now got a series of subcommittees, and we hope by the end of this year we're going to have a report that will begin to inform a real discussion around an initiative that will start getting signatures around this time next year.
Okay, and before I let you go, I want to ask you real quickly about the Bay Bridge. There are allegations that Caltrans not only accepted substandard work, but also tried to silence engineers who were critical. State Transportation Secretary Brian Kelly is now ordering the CHP to investigate. Do you think there should be a criminal investigation?
I think there should always be an investigation of the facts, and whether that's criminal or a more traditional investigation, that's above my capacity at this point with the facts that I've been presented to judge. That said, if the allegations prove to be true, people need to be held accountable. This has not been an easy project for the state, and its impact is so much bigger than the Bay Bridge. It impacts people's confidence in a high-speed rail system, and perhaps more problematic than anything else, will impact people's judgment given the opportunity, which they must be soon, to address the number one issue, infrastructure issue in the state, and that's water and water bonds. So we need to be held to a higher rate of accountability, and if something was done wrong, people need to be fired and need to be, I think, we need to, as taxpayers, be confident that we're doing everything we can to be honest and thoughtful about that.
All right. Well, Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.